Movies centered around serial killers are probably among the more unique ones out there, mainly because their premises rely on some of the most horrible people in existence and the terrible things they've done. But despite that, the general public has proven on many occasions to have some sort of sick fascination with them, to try and understand just what goes on in the heads of these sick, twisted, insane individuals. Or alternatively, sometimes serial killers just make for a really effective villain, because there doesn't have to be any rhyme or reason for their actions, and can realistically do evil things just because they want to. But today, I'd like to focus on a slightly different aspect of movies focusing on serial killers, which is the ones that have a serial killer driving the whole story, but the plot isn't necessarily about them, with the reveal coming very late in their respective movies, as opposed to the viewer knowing who they are from the start. And there will be spoilers for every movie I bring up ahead. So in case you'd like to see any of them for yourself first and don't want to know what happens, you should probably remain very vigilant. I won't be giving out any other spoiler warnings in this video. Okay. So the idea of a movie centered around a serial killer with the killer not being front and center isn't something that's unheard of. Heck, Zodiac famously doesn't reveal who the killer was by the time it's over, if for understandable reasons, and yet it manages to be extremely nerve-wracking in part for that exact reason. But in order to demonstrate the pros and cons of such an approach, I'm going to look at two much more obscure examples of movies to do this, and specifically one that did it correctly and another that didn't. And these two movies would be Lord, a romantic thriller from 1947, and The Boston Strangler, a fictional account of the search for Albert DeSalvo released in 1968. Because while both take their sweet time in revealing who the killer is, The Boston Strangler does a much better job of handling that approach than Lord did. Because here's the thing. Lord is about a deranged man who, well, lures girls to their death by posting Lonely Hearts ads in the newspaper and then strangling them. And with hardly anything to go on, the police turn to a chorus girl whose best friend was a victim of the killer, played by Lucille Ball in a rare dramatic role, to basically use herself as bait so that they can track down the killer. Now, being as there are a lot of Lonely Hearts ads to answer, there are a variety of suspects that turn out to be red herrings, including a delusional Russian fashion designer, as well as a business that turns out to traffic young women into slavery. But where things get really interesting is when she falls in love with a charming rich playboy, played by George Sanders, only for her, the audience, and the police to come to suspect that he is the killer. But in the end, it turns out that the killer is his best friend? Now you might be wondering, why am I saying it like that? Because said friend gets barely any characterization. Half the time he's on screen, you don't even know he's there. So by the time it's revealed to the audience that he's the real murderer, most are apt to have hardly any idea who he is and be more confused than anything else. Because unless one is picking up on some very subtle hints that are easy to miss, they aren't likely to even notice he exists, which can make the reveal in his subsequent attempt to frame Sanders fall a little flat. Because even amateur writers will tell you that a golden rule of storytelling is that if you're going to do a huge reveal surrounding a specific character, you have to make sure the audience is actually aware of their existence and that they actually know who that person is. Otherwise, what's the point of having a twist centered around them? But that's exactly what Lord does. And the results are, shall we say, a bit underwhelming. Especially when you take into account that this character is supposed to be the best friend of the male lead, so the potential for the audience to really feel the impact of his betrayal is completely lost because he isn't given enough focus. Now, the thing is, this movie isn't really about the serial killer when it's all said and done, and is much more about how his actions lead to Ball and Sanders' romance. And this isn't too surprising, considering this movie is actually a remake of a French film starring Maurice Chevalier. Now, I don't know much about the French version, and specifically if the reveal was handled better there, or was even the same, but one thing I will say is for those who know the types of roles they played, Sanders definitely makes for a better red herring than Chevalier. But to stay on track, the point is that the serial killer, his motivations, and deeds function more as a downplayed MacGuffin, being used to bring the two leads together and then almost tear them apart, than be the actual focus of the story. But that still doesn't excuse the fact that it doesn't handle the killer nearly as well as it could have. Because once again, with how frankly invisible the character is for most of the film, it makes the reveal a lot more confusing and doesn't carry anywhere near the impact that it should have. And honestly, they didn't have to change much in order to make it work a lot better. All they had to do was feature him a bit more prominently, just so the audience could actually get a handle on who this guy was and establish at least the basic relationship between him and Sanders. That's all they had to do to make the twist way more effective. Because the way it's done in the film, it makes the reveal feel both confusing and contrived because of the fact that he has so little characterization. As if it's just to tie up loose ends rather than anything that was significant to the plot. Now just compare this with the Boston Strangler. Because Albert DeSalvo isn't even introduced until 2/3 of the way through the movie, and before that, this man's existence isn't even remotely alluded to. But in this case, the reveal works a lot better for that exact reason. Because until DeSalvo is finally shown, the movie is told from the perspective of the police, desperate for a lead and going to any lengths possible to find him. And the fact that he proves so elusive, on top of the fact that it looks like they've got him so many times before something comes along to prove that they aren't the killer, makes the audience start to wonder what kind of person the Strangler could actually be. And then out of nowhere, he turns out to be just your average plumber with a family and everything. It just so happens that he's also completely insane and doesn't even know it, suffering from blackouts where he goes out and kills random women in ways only a madman would, then forgets the whole thing once it's over. And while this reveal similarly comes out of nowhere, what makes it work is both the fact that DeSalvo is just a random person that managed to fly under the police's radar and had no run-ins with them beforehand, as well as that his profession alone explains a lot of previously unanswered questions. In other words, it all fits together with what had been previously established, as well as the fact that the movie is told from the police's perspective. So the mystery and reveal of it all is a lot more effective and important. Now, before I go any further, let me just take a moment to note that while, yes, this movie was based off the real-life incident of Albert DeSalvo strangling 13 women to death, the movie takes extreme liberties with what actually happened, to the point that the writers were just barely avoiding charges of false advertising when they claimed it was, quote, based on a true story. Because, among other things, the real-life DeSalvo knew exactly what he was doing, and moreover was perfectly able to recount his crimes to the police. While in the movie, DeSalvo is depicted as suffering from some kind of extreme form of split personality disorder, where one side is a perfectly normal, loving family man, while the other is an insane, violent psychopath whose only impulse and desire is to kill in extremely violent ways. And that's only one change they made. Frankly, this movie is about as true to life as Braveheart. But the point here is, the reveal of DeSalvo in the movie is a lot more effective because the police have no idea who the killer is. The audience has no idea who the killer is, and then out of nowhere, he's finally shown to be both everything you do and don't expect him to be. And again, most of the impact the reveal does have in this case would have been mitigated had he been shown beforehand and the audience made aware of his existence. In many ways, how he's finally revealed evokes the way Peter Lorre's killer is finally shown to the viewer in M. Because just like in the Boston Strangler, for half the movie, everybody is looking for this child killer, and then he just turns out to be some random man roaming the streets. And like I said before, that works in these cases because it's not about trying to figure out who the killer is, but rather let the audience sweat it out. Have their imaginations run wild, waiting for the reveal of who these horrible, calculating people could really be. And again, the fact that in both instances, they're revealed to just be seemingly normal people suffering from a horrible mental illness only makes the whole thing even more disturbing. But like I said earlier, in the case of Lord, the fact that the viewer is made aware of the killer's existence, but not that he's in any way significant, majorly detracts from the reveal because half the audience isn't even likely to know who he is or that he was of any importance. It wouldn't be nearly as much of a problem if he at least stood out enough to be memorable. And not to mention, the one thing that is established about the killer is never brought up in the context of the character beyond owning a particular book. Now, as I said before, in the end, who the killer isn't really the point of the movie, but that doesn't mean it didn't screw up as far as making the audience aware of who the real killer was. Because when it comes to serial killer movies, you can really only handle the killer 3 ways and have it work, which is either have the audience know who they are to begin with, establish the character but don't reveal they are the murderer until later, or have the killer turn out to be somebody even the audience doesn't know. And once again, both M and the Boston Strangler not only took the third approach, but managed to execute it quite well, while Lord tries to take the second approach, but fails because it doesn't do enough to establish the character in question. It's a fine movie in other regards, don't get me wrong, but as a serial killer movie goes, it fumbled the reveal pretty badly. Now, obviously, I could give plenty of other examples of serial killer movies that both did and didn't do a good job of handling its killer. For instance, The Silence of the Lambs is an excellent example of the first way to handle the killer because the audience knows who Buffalo Bill is right from the start, and the movie is about the FBI and police looking for him by recruiting another serial killer. But honestly, I think I've already made my point with all of this. That the whole reason behind having a serial killer be front and center in a movie is for, well, the serial killer. So no matter what else the movie is focused on, that character must be given proper attention if the movie is to work. Even if the movie isn't ultimately about the killer, they must still be handled correctly. Otherwise, it might just drag down the other aspects of the movie along with them. Okay, that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that in order for a movie focusing on a serial killer to work, the killer either has to be well established or a complete unknown before the reveal, or do you believe there are other ways of handling the whole thing? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And like always, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video if you don't want to. You can have any opinion on this topic and the movies discussed here that you want to, and if you think I've got it all wrong, that's perfectly okay. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.